He thought he controlled everything: money, power, fear. But one wrong photograph shattered it all. Marcus DeLuca, the ruthless Mafia boss, stared at an image of his ex, holding twins he never knew existed. In that instant, his empire began to crumble, and every choice he'd made out of pride now threatened to destroy the only people he'd ever loved. Tonight, nothing could protect him from the past catching up, and the storm was only beginning. Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Selena, and welcome back to Dark Love Stories, where passion and peril collide, and love walks the line between danger and desire. Tonight we dive into a story of power, pride, and consequences, one that will grip your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. Before we step into this world, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that whispers to your darkest emotions. And stay close, because some secrets are meant to be uncovered, one heartbeat at a time. He stood on the balcony of his penthouse. The city sprawled beneath him like a river of lights bleeding into darkness. Marcus DeLuca, Mafia boss, titan of his empire, untouchable in wealth and influence, took a long drag from his cigar. The smoke curled around him, wisps of gray drifting like ghosts of choices he had long ago buried. He did not notice the chill in the air, nor the faint scent of rain that promised to sweep through the streets tonight. He only noticed the silence that followed the usual symphony of his power, the phones that never stopped ringing, the doors that swung open and shut at his command, the subordinates whose lives he held like marionette strings. Control was his art. Pride was his canvas. And yet, something was different tonight. He had no idea what he had lost. The penthouse was opulent, every inch a testament to Marcus's dominance. Thick Persian rugs that swallowed footsteps, chandeliers that glittered like captive stars, walls lined with art worth more than most lives. But wealth could not disguise the emptiness pressing in around him. There was a hollow ache beneath the surface, a whisper of vulnerability he refused to acknowledge. The empire, the money, the fear he inspired, they were all shields, masks, illusions. He lit another cigar, letting the smoke fog the room. Even as he admired the city's heartbeat below, his mind wandered to a name he had tried to erase, a face he had buried in memory like contraband: Isabella Hart. Across town, in a small apartment cluttered with the soft chaos of a life half-lived, Isabella rocked herself gently in the kitchen chair. A baby monitor crackled in the background, the twin cries overlapping in a discordant symphony that pierced her chest. She'd spent months balancing work, sleepless nights, and quiet desperation, and still she felt the emptiness. She thought of Marcus sometimes, not the man who had abandoned her, but the shadow he cast on her life, the echo of a love that had burned too brightly to survive. The twins slept fitfully, tiny fists curling and uncurling, and she could not help but imagine what life might have been if he had stayed. She shook her head, trying to force the memory away. Pride, after all, was not only his weapon, it had been hers too, once. Back on the balcony, Marcus exhaled smoke and stared at the horizon. The city was his chessboard, each move calculated, each pawn disposable. Yet tonight the empire felt fragile. A minor tremor of unease slid down his spine, so slight he almost ignored it. Almost. There was a message waiting on his phone, a notification he hadn't seen through the haze of late-night calls and threats. Something small, a routine hospital delivery confirmation. But something about it tugged at his instincts. He didn't check it. He never checked what wasn't urgent. It was beneath him. Control, after all, demanded detachment, yet a sliver of doubt gnawed at him. Meanwhile, Isabella's apartment was alive with motion. The twins, Lucas and Lila, had woken simultaneously. She carried them into the living room, cradling one in each arm, their tiny bodies warm against her chest. She hummed softly, a melody half forgotten, weaving it into the silence. The apartment smelled of formula, laundry detergent, and the faint, lingering bitterness of sleepless nights. She glanced at the old photo on the refrigerator, Marcus and her, arm in arm, smiling on a summer day that seemed impossibly distant. The sight tightened her chest. She had made her choice. She had refused to beg, and yet some part of her wondered, did he even remember? Back in his empire, Marcus's mind wandered to streets he had walked with purpose, buildings he had bought and sold, alliances forged and broken. His phone buzzed again, insistently, but he ignored it. It was always noise. He had taught himself to filter out the irrelevant. Still, the sensation of being watched, of something shifting just beyond his control, had become a gnawing drumbeat in the background. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the light like molten gold. He thought of Isabella briefly, dismissing the memory as folly, pride. Everything could be handled with pride. But the universe, he would learn, had other plans. The hospital notification went unnoticed, routed by mistake from the courier. A photo intended for another recipient was attached. Isabella smiling weakly, holding the twins swaddled in soft blankets. The words accompanying it were mundane, clinical, but the image, it was undeniable. Marcus, engrossed in his empire, oblivious, would never see it unless fate intervened, and fate, tonight, had chosen him. Isabella, meanwhile, checked her phone for messages from friends or family, the twins breathing, softening in her arms. She did not see the looming storm, the hand of Marcus poised unknowingly over the detonator of old regrets. She hummed to herself, rocking them, unaware that the past had prepared a trap designed to pierce even the armor of a man like Marcus DeLuca. Rain began to tap lightly against the glass of his balcony, a rhythm both soothing and urgent, a reminder that even empires, no matter how invincible, were subject to erosion. He lifted the glass, staring into it as though it contained all the answers. Pride whispered that he was untouchable. Experience whispered caution. Neither voice was strong enough to command him tonight. Something else, a shadow of the past, a crack in the veneer, waited. The twins stirred again in Isabella's arms, one hand reaching for her cheek, the other flailing softly. She murmured a barely audible prayer and kissed their foreheads. She had survived everything the world had thrown at her. She had endured betrayal, loneliness, exhaustion, and yet a strange anticipation settled in the pit of her stomach. Something was coming. She did not know what. Something unseen, unstoppable, and intimately connected to a name she had tried to forget. Marcus finally walked back into the penthouse, the drink forgotten, the smoke curling toward the ceiling. His phone buzzed once more. He glanced at it lazily, then, curiosity prying, he swiped the notification open. The image leapt onto the screen. Isabella, twins in her arms, smiling weakly, the world's weight balanced in a photograph that should not exist. Time seemed to fracture. The city lights blurred. The cigar's smoke no longer danced. It stung. The drink in his hand trembled. Every ounce of control, every carefully constructed shield began to crumble. Marcus's chest tightened. He did not move, did not breathe, did not speak. And then the first scream split the night. Not from the city, not from the streets below, but from somewhere deep inside himself. Because he realized, before any words were spoken, before any calls were made, that nothing in his golden empire could ever prepare him for what that single, damning photograph had unleashed. The rain poured harder now, tapping like a verdict against the balcony glass, and Marcus DeLuca, king of a kingdom built on fear, pride, and precision, felt the first undeniable fracture in his control, a fracture that would only widen, consuming everything he thought he had mastered. He dropped the phone, and in that instant the sound of shattering glass echoed, not from the balcony, not from the city, but from the world he had built around himself, his empire, his pride, his life, the illusion of control, All teetered on the edge of an unseen precipice, and Marcus, the untouchable, the indomitable, had no idea what awaited him next. The morning light did not touch Marcus DeLuca with warmth. It was pale, brittle, seeping through the blinds like an intruder into the controlled sanctum of his penthouse. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He had not moved beyond the balcony where the photograph, Isabella, twins in her arms, smiling in a world he had thought forgotten, had burned itself into his retina. The empire hummed with life below, cars crawling like obedient ants, deals made, loyalties tested, threats whispered into the right ears. And yet Marcus felt unmoored. He strode through the halls of his empire, the familiar hum of authority failing to soothe the storm inside him. He lit a cigar, habit not comfort, and exhaled, letting smoke curl toward the ceiling, framing him in its murky embrace. Pride whispered, as it always did, "Ignore it. It is not your concern. It is not your burden." But another voice, quieter, colder, harder to dismiss, reminded him that something had shifted. That photograph was not a mistake to be ignored, and yet he chose to dismiss it, to tuck it into the corner of his mind where all inconvenient truths lived. He would not allow himself to be vulnerable. He would not allow history to weaken him. Isabella, meanwhile, walked the uneven floors of her small apartment. Twins swaddled against her chest. Lucas stirred first, a fist curling against her collarbone, then Lila, soft whimpers escaping tiny lips. The apartment smelled of laundry detergent, formula, and faint coffee that had long gone cold. The monotony of survival pressed down on her, a weight she had learned to carry with quiet dignity. The photograph she had sent, meant for the hospital records, a mundane confirmation of medical checkups, had been intercepted, misdirected, and now it existed somewhere in Marcus's world. She had no idea, and yet a tremor of unease skated across her spine, the sense that some past shadow had found its way back, unwelcome and unbidden. Marcus sat behind his desk, the photograph still on his phone, unopened again after a half hour of pacing. The room around him was suffocating in its grandeur. Dark wood, velvet chairs, golden trimmings. Every item in the penthouse screamed mastery, control, invincibility. And yet, for the first time in decades, control felt brittle. The phone buzzed once more, a routine notification, something about a shipment, a ledger. His hand hovered, but he did not touch it. He did not want to be pulled away from the fractal of tension that consumed him. He was aware for the first time of the quiet absence inside himself, a space carved by years of choosing power over love, fear over connection. Across town, Isabella fed the twins, each bottle measured, each burp coaxed with practiced patience. She watched them, their eyes closing in exhaustion, their breaths synchronizing with the rhythm of her own. She wondered, often, if Marcus had ever thought of her, of the lives he had walked away from with a single arrogant step. Pride, she knew, had been his fortress as much as it had been a weapon, and she had built her own walls to match. But the twins, Lucas and Lila, were undeniable proof that some part of him had once touched her world and left an indelible mark. The world of Marcus DeLuca moved relentlessly, indifferent to inner crises. Subordinates arrived, bowing to schedules, threats, and whispered commands. One by one, they reported the minutiae of the empire: shipments, collections, disputes. He nodded, lips pressed thin, voice clipped and controlled. His mind was elsewhere, circling back to that image. Isabella, twins, smiling. The very picture seemed to mock him, insinuating vulnerability into the armor he had built with so much care. She is alive. They are alive. And you are too late. The thought gnawed like acid at the base of his pride. Meanwhile, Isabella's phone buzzed, a message, innocuous, from a friend checking in. She typed a reply, careful, measured, the twins balanced against her chest. Life was full of small, repetitive motions, and she clung to them like lifelines. She did not know Marcus had seen the photograph. She did not know that a ripple had begun to spread through his world, threatening to undo years of careful construction, threatening to ignite a storm she had no ability to predict. Marcus leaned back in his chair, smoke trailing from his cigar as he contemplated the notion that perhaps pride had been a poison he had swallowed too eagerly. He thought of the decisions he had made, the women he had loved and discarded, the alliances he had broken with a single sentence, the lives he had shaped and ruined. And yet, despite all of that, the photograph haunted him. It suggested a past he could not erase, a connection he could not sever. He made a choice. Again, the same fatal choice he had made so many times before. He would reject it. He would reject the intrusion of human weakness into his world of power. He would walk away, claiming victory over vulnerability itself. Isabella, sitting cross-legged on her worn sofa, closed her eyes briefly, twins resting against her shoulders. She whispered a prayer for the safety of both herself and her children, unaware that the very man she had once trusted, the man whose pride had shattered their world, now grappled with an image that would begin to dictate his every move. She did not know the storm approaching. She did not know that her existence, her careful, fragile life, was about to collide violently with a past that refused to remain buried. The morning passed. Marcus, in a calculated display of detachment, returned to business. Meetings, phone calls, decisions, all executed with mechanical precision. But beneath it, a tension simmered, a quiet hum of dread that no amount of power could silence. He refused to act on the photograph, telling himself he had chosen correctly, that weakness had no place in his empire. He had won. Yet somewhere across the city, a ripple had formed. A hospital call, a misplaced delivery, a bureaucratic mistake. Something small, trivial, but loaded with consequences, was already moving toward him. The universe, indifferent to pride, had begun its quiet work. Isabella, in her apartment, rocked the twins to sleep for a brief moment. She glanced at the calendar, appointments, work shifts, deadlines. Her life was ordinary, fragile, and unprotected. Yet there was a fire in her chest, a knowledge that something was shifting beyond her control, a sense of the old world intruding into her new one. Marcus, standing again on the balcony as the day faded into dusk, felt the first sting of fear, though he would not name it as such. His empire was intact, his wealth was unquestionable, and yet he could not shake the shadow cast by a single photograph. The twins, he did not know them yet, had already begun to alter the landscape of his existence. He had rejected the truth, ignored the call of consequence, and that, he would learn, was the moment the crack became a fissure. The sun set in streaks of orange and blood red. Rain threatened again, dark clouds gathering like a congregation of omens over the city. The phone buzzed, again innocuous, routine, but Marcus did not reach for it. Not yet. Pride held him frozen. He would not act on weakness. He would not allow his heart to be manipulated by fate. And somewhere, in a sterile hallway of a hospital he had never visited, a small, imperceptible hand brushed against a blanket. A quiet sound, almost swallowed by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echoes of footsteps. That hand, unnoticed, would be the catalyst of chaos that would soon crash into Marcus's controlled world. Marcus turned from the balcony, convinced he had mastered the morning, unaware that the first true threat to his empire and to his life was already moving toward him. A single message, a single mistake, a single photograph would force him to confront a truth he had refused to see. And tonight, his empire's foundations would begin to quake in ways he could never anticipate. Rain tapped relentlessly against the high-rise windows, a rhythmic reminder that the city could not be tamed, not even by Marcus DeLuca. The empire stretched below him like a breathing organism, obedient yet unpredictable, thriving on fear and loyalty in equal measure. And yet, for the first time in his life, Marcus felt the faint tremor of instability coursing through the foundations he had built so meticulously. A subtle tremor, a message sent to the wrong recipient, a photograph where it did not belong, was enough to unsettle him. He did not yet realize that the tremor would soon become a storm. He lit another cigar, the smoke wrapping around him in spirals of gray, but even the ritual could not anchor him. Every command he issued, every call he made, carried a weight that felt foreign. The men beneath him, loyal, brutal, obedient, noticed the difference. In the subtle shift of his gaze, in the tremor of his hand over the phone, they sensed the imperceptible crack in his armor. Yet they dared not comment, for fear was a currency that never devalued in Marcus's world. And still, the crack widened. Across town, Isabella navigated her day with a precision that had become second nature. Lucas and Lila demanded constant attention, their tiny fingers seeking warmth, their cries punctuating every thought. She moved through the apartment like a conductor, orchestrating the chaos with grace, but a shadow clung to her. The misplaced photograph had left her with no knowledge of Marcus's reaction, yet she sensed a shift in the air, a pull of destiny she could not ignore. Something was coming, and she could not prepare for it. Marcus paced his office, the floorboards creaking beneath polished shoes. Calls came in, each one a minor skirmish in the endless battle for dominance. A shipment delayed, a territory challenged, a betrayal whispered in the wrong ear. He handled them all, but each success felt hollow. He glanced at the photograph again, the twins in Isabella's arms, and the tightness in his chest returned stronger this time. He had rejected the past, refused to engage with vulnerability, and yet the image gnawed at him. The empire, vast and unyielding, could not shield him from what he had ignored. Isabella's afternoon was fractured by a phone call that rattled her more than she expected. It was a nurse from the hospital, a polite but urgent voice informing her of a scheduling error. A routine checkup for the twins had been misrecorded. Nothing life-threatening, nothing to panic over. But as she listened, she felt the gnawing weight of anticipation, the unshakable sense that her past and present were converging in ways she could not foresee. She held the twins closer, inhaling the soft warmth of their hair, counting the tiny breaths that seemed to measure her heartbeats. Back in his office, Marcus's phone buzzed again. It was a message from one of his lieutenants, short, coded, referencing a minor skirmish in the outskirts of his territory. He barely read it, dismissing the matter with a clipped response. Yet the universe did not operate on dismissal alone. A second notification arrived, a courier's confirmation, innocuous at first glance, but containing a photograph he had not expected. It was a duplicate of the one that had first shattered his composure. He stared, heart hammering, as recognition and denial collided violently inside him. Pride whispered to ignore it. Experience warned that ignoring it could unravel everything. Isabella prepared dinner while the twins slept briefly in their cribs. She moved through the apartment, each action deliberate, the quiet ticking of the clock marking time in a world that demanded precision. And yet, the sense of unease persisted. She did not know that Marcus, miles away, was grappling with the same invisible thread, that the past had begun tugging at their lives with relentless insistence. She did not know that her careful, protective life was being shadowed by a storm she could not see. The evening descended, a velvet darkness cloaking the city. Marcus remained at his desk, the photograph illuminated on his phone, the twins' tiny faces etched into his mind. The men around him sensed the tension, the uncharacteristic hesitation in their boss. It was a momentary lapse, subtle and fleeting, but enough to sow doubt in their loyalty, enough to let a whisper of uncertainty slip into the machinery of his empire. Meanwhile, Isabella paced the living room, the twins finally asleep, her thoughts tangled in memories and fears. She recalled the nights when Marcus had held her, when his pride had been tempered by tenderness, and the sharpness of the present made the absence feel like a blade. She did not know that Marcus was aware of her existence again, did not know that a single photograph had begun to bridge the chasm between past and present. Back in the penthouse, Marcus's phone rang. He did not answer immediately, a moment of hesitation that would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew him. The voice on the other end was low, urgent, careful with words. "Boss, you need to see this." It was a lie wrapped in truth, a call that would initiate a chain reaction of consequences. Marcus, clenching the phone, felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the old thrill of control. But beneath it was a creeping fear. Something had started, and it would not stop. Isabella, sitting at the kitchen table, glanced at the clock. The world outside had grown darker, the rain heavier. She felt a flicker of dread, a sense that unseen forces were moving pieces on a board she could not see. She rocked back and forth, instinctively shielding the twins, imagining threats that did not yet exist. And yet her intuition whispered a truth she could not name. The past was not done with her. Marcus walked to the window, phone pressed to his ear. His voice, calm but cold, carried the authority of a man who had never tolerated weakness. "Explain," he said. The words were measured, clipped, but inside him, chaos rippled. Every instinct screamed that this was no ordinary matter, that the photograph, the courier, the twins, they were part of a web he could not yet comprehend. On the other end, the lieutenant hesitated, knowing that any misstep could trigger Marcus's wrath. It's the twins, boss. There's been confusion. A photograph, mistakenly sent. You need to..." His voice cut off as Marcus's grip tightened on the phone, a silent warning that consequences would be swift for any miscommunication. Isabella's apartment fell silent except for the ticking clock, her thoughts racing faster than she could contain. She had no way of knowing that Marcus had already seen the photograph, that the tiny hands of Lucas and Lila had begun to influence a man whose empire moved like clockwork, whose decisions dictated life and death across the city. The threads were weaving together, tugging at a destiny that neither of them could stop. Marcus dropped the phone, pacing again, heart hammering. He had refused to acknowledge the first photograph, refused to confront the truth, but now consequences were manifesting in real time. He had rejected vulnerability, and the cost was already pressing against him. His pride, once his shield, now felt like a chain around his chest. The empire he thought unassailable trembled beneath the weight of an unseen force, the consequences of his choices, the echoes of the past, the life he had abandoned. And somewhere, in a hospital, the twins were being prepped for their routine checkup, unaware that their existence was shaking the foundations of an empire, that their small, fragile bodies were catalysts for chaos that would engulf Marcus in ways he could not yet imagine. Marcus glanced at the city below, lights blurred by rain, and realized that ignoring the photograph had not spared him. It had set into motion a chain of events that could unravel his empire entirely. He did not yet know how close danger had crept, nor how the lives of Isabella and the twins were now entwined irrevocably with his own. And then his phone buzzed again. A second photograph arrived, this one with a note, simple, stark. "They need you." Night draped over the city like a velvet shroud, thick and suffocating, and Marcus DeLuca felt its weight pressing into his chest. The empire thrummed beneath him, a pulse he had once controlled with absolute precision. But tonight the rhythm was off, uneven, uncertain. He paced through the penthouse, the photograph of Isabella and the twins still glowing on his phone, a ghostly reminder that the past refused to stay buried. Every step echoed in the marble halls, each sound amplified by the silence of an empire suddenly deaf to its master. He lit a cigar with trembling hands, the ember flaring like a warning. Smoke coiled around him, curling against the dark, reflecting the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus had always believed that control could contain everything: loyalty, fear, desire, betrayal. But the world he had built on precision, on ruthless decision-making, began to splinter under the weight of one simple truth. He had ignored it once. Pride had forced him to turn away, and now consequence had arrived. Across town, Isabella cradled the twins, their tiny forms pressed to her chest. Lucas's soft whimpers merged with Lila's fragile cries, and the apartment felt suddenly too small, too confining. The misplaced photograph had been forgotten. Her life demanded constant motion, but instinct whispered a warning she could not name. Something was approaching, a force beyond her comprehension, and her heart beat faster, tethered to a past she had tried to forget. She rocked them slowly, murmuring the lullabies she had once sung for herself, trying to soothe not only their bodies, but the gnawing tension in her own chest. Marcus finally made the decision he had been avoiding for hours. He would act. He called his lieutenant directly, the low vibration of authority in his voice cutting through every word. "Send someone. Find her. Now." There was no question, no hesitation. The Empire's wheels had shifted irreversibly. Action had begun, and with action came danger. Pride no longer protected him. It had exposed him. Meanwhile, Isabella's phone vibrated insistently on the counter. She glanced at it casually at first, expecting another work message, another mundane checkup reminder. But the screen glowed with unfamiliar numbers, messages that were cryptic, urgent. Her stomach tightened. The premonition she had felt since the morning now pressed like a hand against her ribs. She ignored the first, then the second, trying to convince herself that it was an error, a wrong number. Yet each new message escalated the tension, and the rhythm of her heart betrayed the calm she tried to project. Marcus's operatives fanned out across the city like shadows, their orders precise, silent, lethal if necessary. The message had been simple. Find Isabella Hart, protect the twins, understand the context. The photograph had shattered Marcus's careful calculations, and he would not allow it to slip further into chaos. Yet, even as he commanded the search, a darker realization gnawed at him. The past was no longer a memory, it was a threat. Every second he delayed was a second closer to disaster. Isabella tried to dismiss the vibrations on her phone, but curiosity and dread collided. She unlocked the first message. It was vague, unnervingly precise. "You are being watched. Don't leave the apartment." Her hands shook. She clutched the twins closer, their warmth grounding her, yet fear coursed through her veins like wildfire. Lucas's fingers grazed her cheek, and she whispered his name, an anchor to a reality that was no longer safe. The storm outside intensified, sheets of rain hammering against her window, rattling the frame like a drumbeat of impending chaos. Somewhere in the city, Marcus's men moved swiftly, shadows slipping through alleys and rooftops, tracing the faint trail left by the photograph and the hospital misrouting. Marcus himself stayed behind, orchestrating from the penthouse, every decision deliberate yet fueled by rising panic. He did not sleep, did not eat, did not allow the distractions of empire to soften his focus. Pride demanded clarity, but instinct whispered a dangerous truth. He had underestimated the reach of his own past. Isabella's phone buzzed again. She froze mid-step, twins cradled against her chest as the screen displayed a message that chilled her blood. "Leave the apartment now, or you'll regret it." Her fingers hovered over the screen, trembling. She glanced at the twins, then at the door, then at the rain-streaked streets below. Leaving felt impossible, yet staying felt like surrender. And somewhere deep in her chest, she knew the photograph had summoned something that could not be ignored. Back in his penthouse, Marcus stared at his phone, his jaw tight, the city sprawling below him in a sea of lights and shadows. The photograph had changed everything, and the messages, the warnings, the stakes, they converged into a single undeniable truth. Action was inevitable. He did not know the full scope, did not yet know the danger's shape, but he understood one immutable fact. The lives of Isabella and the twins were now entangled with his own in ways that could not be undone. The storm outside broke with sudden fury, wind howling, rain lashing the streets, and Marcus felt it as though it mirrored the chaos inside him. The Empire, once a precise machine, now threatened to spin out of control under the weight of human vulnerability he had refused to acknowledge. Pride and power had failed him. Instinct and fear drove him forward. Every second wasted was a second closer to catastrophe. Isabella, finally, made a decision she had resisted for hours. She grabbed a small bag the twins bundled carefully inside and approached the door. Every instinct screamed to stay, to hide, to trust no one. Yet the messages had shattered the illusion of safety. She opened the door, and the hallway outside seemed different, charged with anticipation, every shadow a potential threat. The first step into the unknown felt like stepping into a storm, a threshold she could not return from once crossed. Marcus's men were already moving, shadows flitting silently through the city, their eyes sharp, instincts honed. Every route Isabella might take, every movement she made was being traced with meticulous precision. Yet Marcus could not reach her in time. He could orchestrate, command, calculate, but the moment of confrontation, the collision of past and present, remained tantalizingly beyond his grasp. The twins stirred in Isabella's arms, sensing the tension, their tiny hands gripping her neck and shoulder. She whispered to them, the sound barely audible over the storm, her voice both a lullaby and a shield. Somewhere across the city, Marcus watched, powerless to intervene in the next few critical moments, the first real step toward a crisis that would consume them all. Isabella opened the door fully, stepping into the hallway, and in that same instant, a shadow detached itself from the darkness outside. A hand reached for the door, and a voice, low and dangerous, whispered, "Going somewhere, Isabella?" Marcus DeLuca's penthouse was silent, yet the silence was heavy, oppressive, laden with the weight of consequences he refused to acknowledge. Rain continued its relentless drum against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a muted percussion echoing the rapid pulse beneath his chest. The photograph still glowed on his phone, a ghostly accusation, yet he had chosen denial, as he always had. He had chosen pride over vulnerability, empire over heart, distance over connection, and in that refusal he felt the first tremors of a storm he could not command. He poured himself a glass of bourbon, amber liquid catching the light like molten gold, and let it linger on his tongue, the burn both comfort and curse. Pride whispered that he had made the correct decision. Weakness had no place in his world. Love had no place in his life. The photograph was a mistake, an intrusion. Ignore it. Ignore the messages. Ignore the warning. Marcus believed he could master what he could not see. Across town, Isabella moved with quiet precision, her steps measured, every motion calculated to protect the twins. Lucas and Lila slept lightly in her arms, murmurs escaping as she rocked them gently. The hallway outside her apartment, once familiar, now seemed charged with danger. Every shadow was a threat, every sound a harbinger. Her instincts screamed caution, yet she pressed forward, torn between survival and the inexorable pull of her past. The photograph, the messages, the storm, they were all threads weaving toward an intersection she could neither predict nor avoid. Marcus's phone buzzed again, a message from an associate, coded, urgent, precise. "Boss, situation escalating. They are moving. You need to intervene. Now." The words should have jolted him into action, ignited the fire that ruled his empire. But he did not answer immediately. He did not even glance. Pride had cemented itself as a barrier between understanding and fear. Marcus turned his gaze to the city below, watching the rain-slick streets blur into one continuous pool of lights, each one a life he controlled, each one a life he had the power to command. But not tonight. Not now. Isabella pressed on, moving through the dimly lit hallways with the twins bundled close. Each step felt precarious, each heartbeat a reminder that the world outside her apartment carried dangers she could not yet name. Her instincts screamed caution, yet the pull of Marcus's presence, the echo of their past, was tangible. Somewhere across the city, Marcus watched, orchestrating shadows, yet still refusing the full truth. His pride, impenetrable and blinding, rendered him deaf to the urgency that the photograph and the messages demanded. The rain intensified, drumming against windows, doors, streets, masking footsteps, concealing movement. Marcus's operatives scoured the city with precision, tracing potential routes, mapping exits, shadows moving like predators in a storm. Marcus knew they would find her, protect her, but he refused to move himself. Pride whispered it was unnecessary. Vulnerability was a liability. The empire was enough. Yet beneath it all, a growing sense of unease festered, gnawing at the edges of his control. He had made a choice. He had refused. And that refusal, he would soon discover, had consequences far beyond the image on his phone. Isabella, sensing the shift in atmosphere, paused in a narrow corridor. The shadows seemed to move with her, shaping themselves into shapes of danger. The twins stirred, tiny fingers curling, breaths quickening. She whispered to them, soft words meant to anchor them to safety, even as the world she thought she understood began to fracture around her. The photograph, the messages, the storm, they were converging, pulling her forward into a space she could neither see nor escape. Marcus lit another cigar, the ember glowing like a heartbeat in the dark. Smoke curled around him, a shield, a barrier, a reminder of control. He scrolled through the messages again, reading, rereading, calculating. Each word, each symbol, each warning he dismissed with careful precision. Pride demanded clarity, detachment, certainty. He would not act out of fear. He would not surrender to the tug of old connections. He had chosen correctly, or so he told himself. Meanwhile, Isabella's apartment door opened slightly, just enough for shadows to pass through, just enough for the air to carry whispers of danger. Her instincts flared, and she froze, listening. Every footstep, every murmur of wind, every distant siren sharpened her awareness. The twins shifted in her arms, sensing tension, and she murmured reassurance, even as her heart thrummed with a growing, inarticulate terror. Somewhere, not far away, Marcus's men moved, their presence invisible yet inevitable. And Marcus himself, oblivious to the imminent danger, continued to refuse the direct call to act. A sudden knock echoed through the hallway outside Isabella's apartment, sharp and deliberate. Her breath caught, body rigid. Lucas and Lila stirred, and she adjusted them protectively. "Who is it?" she whispered into the shadows, her voice soft but firm. No reply came, only the persistent echo of her own heartbeat. She backed away, instincts screaming, yet every decision felt fraught with peril. The photograph, the messages, the warnings, they had led her here, to the brink of something she could neither escape nor predict. Marcus's phone vibrated again. Another message, urgent, unmistakable. "They are at risk. You must act immediately. Do not wait." He looked at it, hand hovering over the screen. His pride tightened like a steel cage around his chest. Vulnerability was weakness. Action was unnecessary. He would not compromise his empire for uncertainty. He would ignore the warning, and in that choice he sealed the path forward, setting the stage for consequences he could not yet imagine. Outside Isabella's apartment, the storm intensified. Rain sluiced down walls, turning streets into mirrors of the chaos unfolding within. Shadows shifted, movements too deliberate to be random. A single figure just beyond her vision paused, observing, calculating. Isabella's grip on the twins tightened, her pulse accelerating. She felt the weight of unseen eyes, the pull of an unseen hand on the strings of her life. Marcus poured another drink, swirling the bourbon in the glass. staring into its depth as though answers could be extracted from liquid amber. Pride whispered, again, that he had acted correctly, that interference was unnecessary, that the empire, the photograph, and the past could remain separate. Yet deep within, a gnawing, persistent awareness suggested otherwise. The refusal, the inaction, the denial. It was no longer safe to cling to illusion, and the longer he resisted, the closer the world he had mastered came to fracturing entirely. In the dim hallway outside Isabella's apartment, a shadow shifted silently. A hand reached for the door handle, and at that precise moment, Marcus, still in the penthouse, swirled his bourbon and whispered to himself, "It's not my problem." The storm tore through the city with a ferocity that seemed almost personal, as if the heavens themselves had recognized the collision of past and present and sought to punish it. Rain battered the streets in sheets, thunder rolling overhead like drums, heralding some ancient reckoning. And somewhere in the twisting alleys, Isabella Hart ran. Her steps were hurried, precise, every movement guided by the raw instinct of survival, twins bundled tightly against her chest. Lucas whimpered. Lila's small hand curled into her hair. Each cry amplified the urgency, every heartbeat echoing in the hollow space inside her chest where fear and resolve collided. Her apartment, her sanctuary, was no longer safe. She had glimpsed shadows in the hallways, heard movements that were too deliberate, too close. The city, once familiar, now seemed a labyrinth of danger, each turn threatening unseen consequences. The photograph, the messages, the warnings. They were threads pulling her inexorably toward an encounter she could not yet comprehend. She did not know the reach of Marcus's influence, nor the army of shadows he had deployed, nor that every misstep she made was being observed by men who moved like specters, invisible yet inevitable. Marcus, meanwhile, was confined to the penthouse, powerless to intervene directly. He had refused the warnings, refused the messages, refused to act, not because of indifference, but because of pride. And yet, in the silence of his empire, an unfamiliar sensation crept through him. Dread. The photograph that had once seemed distant now demanded recognition, and the weight of consequence pressed down with tangible force. He felt it in his chest, a tightening that no bourbon, no cigar, no empire could alleviate. Below him, the city pulsed with movement, unaware of the storm's true target. Streets glistened with rain, cars splashing through puddles, umbrellas snapping against the wind. Yet for Isabella, there was no hiding in normalcy. Every shadow was a threat, every gust of wind a messenger. She ducked into an alley pressed against cold brick walls, inhaling the sharp scent of wet stone and gasoline. The twins shifted in her arms, their breaths shallow, and she whispered lullabies she had never sung, words meant to anchor them to safety even as the world threatened to unravel around them. In the penthouse, Marcus's phone vibrated again. Another message, more urgent, more direct. They are in immediate danger. Intervene now or risk disaster. He stared at it, heart hammering, mind racing with scenarios. Pride urged him to ignore it, to maintain the facade of control, to believe that inaction was power. But instinct, a force he rarely acknowledged, screamed at him to move. He did not. Not yet. The twins, the photograph, Isabella. He told himself they were problems of a past he had left behind. But the truth pressed closer, relentless and unyielding, a tide rising against his carefully constructed walls. Isabella's flight took her to a narrow bridge spanning the river, slick with rain, the wind biting through her jacket. She glanced back. Movement shadowed her every step, careful and measured. She could not see them clearly, could not name the threat, yet instinct warned her that the danger was closing, that her refusal to remain hidden had made her a target. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion. The twins squirmed, responding to her tension, tiny bodies that depended entirely on her resilience. And for the first time in hours, she considered surrender, not to the storm outside, but to the reality that she was no longer in control. Marcus, watching from his empire above, poured another glass of bourbon. The night outside mirrored the chaos in his mind. He could feel the pulse of danger creeping across the city, yet he remained inert. Pride, stubborn and immovable, wrapped around his chest like iron. He had chosen, he had refused, and now, though instinct clawed at the edges of his reason, he remained unmoved. The empire could wait, the heart could not. And in that inaction, the first real consequences began to manifest. Isabella reached the middle of the bridge, the rain stinging her face, the wind threatening to topple her steps. The shadows approached faster now, the threat no longer abstract. Every instinct screamed to run, but the twins constrained her, their fragile forms demanding protection. She whispered softly to them, a prayer, a command, a vow. Lucas clutched her shoulder. Lila's tiny hands sought the warmth of her neck. She tightened her grip, her arms shaking under the weight of responsibility and fear. She could not falter. She would not. And yet the world was moving faster than she could anticipate. A figure detached itself from the shadows. The rain masked its approach, but not its intent. Isabella froze, breath catching in her throat. The twins stirred, sensing tension, and she whispered, "Stay close. Don't be afraid." The figure advanced, steps deliberate, voice cutting through the storm. "Isabella Hart, step aside." Marcus's mind, high above, was a maelstrom of calculation and denial. The photograph, the messages, the storm, they were converging in ways he could not yet control. His men were moving, shadows among shadows, but he had refused to engage personally. Pride dictated that he remain untouchable, unflinching, and yet instinct screamed that this was too close, too immediate, too dangerous. The world he had ignored was no longer theoretical. It was happening, and he was powerless to stop it from the confines of his penthouse. The figure lunged forward, and Isabella pivoted instinctively, her body moving before thought. The twins pressed against her chest. She stumbled, one foot slipping on the slick surface, rain spraying like knives across her face. Panic surged, sharp and hot. She caught herself just in time, heart hammering, breaths ragged, but the danger was not neutralized. The figure advanced again, faster now, intent unmistakable. Her world, fragile and carefully maintained, was collapsing into chaos. Marcus's phone buzzed with a flurry of messages. Operatives reporting movement, possible threats identified. But he remained frozen, pride and disbelief locking him in place. The reality of what was happening, the immediate threat to Isabella and the twins, was undeniable. Yet he could not bring himself to act. Not yet. The refusal that had begun as pride was now a chain, binding him as the world descended into peril. Isabella's balance faltered again. The rain slick threatened to betray her, the twins shifting in her arms. A hand reached for her shoulder, not gentle, not negotiating. She turned, and the figure loomed over her, intent, clear, presence threatening. Fear surged in a raw, visceral wave, crashing against the protective shell she had built around herself and the twins. Every step she had taken, every calculation she had made, had led her to this moment. The photograph, the messages, the warnings, they had guided her unwittingly to the precipice. And in that instant, everything slowed, rain dripping, wind howling, heartbeat echoing in her ears. The figure's hand tightened, the twins stirred, the storm seemed to pause in anticipation. Isabella's instinct screamed, the twins cried out, and Marcus remained above, pride still holding him back from action, unaware that the collision he had delayed was imminent. A sharp cry split the storm. Lucas's voice, small and terrified. Isabella stumbled, losing her footing entirely. The twins' small forms pressed against her as she teetered on the edge of the bridge, and the shadow reached for her. And Marcus, still in his penthouse, finally sensed that the consequences of his refusal were no longer abstract. They were happening, and he could no longer control them. The city was soaked in darkness, storm clouds cloaking its familiar skyline, rain slicing through the streets like knives. Marcus DeLuca stood at his penthouse window, overlooking the chaos below, finally sensing that the storm he had ignored for hours was no longer theoretical. It was real, immediate, unavoidable. His empire, once a precise, unyielding machine, seemed fragile under the weight of a single photograph, a single decision, and the consequences of his pride. And in that moment, a cold, sharp realization pierced through him. He had refused the truth, and now the truth would not wait. His phone vibrated violently on the marble countertop. Marcus had ignored countless messages in the past hours, but this one forced itself into his awareness. A simple image loaded on the screen. One glance, and the world shifted beneath him. Isabella Hart, his Isabella, the woman he had loved and lost, stood in a rain-slick alley, twins pressed to her chest, her face pale and drenched with terror. Behind her, two shadows loomed, hands extended, intent unmistakable. And for the first time, Marcus saw it clearly. The photograph had not been a simple mistake. It had been a warning, a misdirected echo of a reality he had refused to face. Time slowed. The bourbon in his hand spilled, unnoticed, pooling over the marble floor, the amber liquid reflecting a storm outside and a tempest inside. He dropped the glass, phone clutched in his hand, his mind racing faster than his body could move. His empire, his carefully constructed walls of control and fear, could not protect her. Not now, not ever. The twins, innocent and unknowing, were in imminent danger. His refusal to act had brought them to the brink. The weight of his pride crashed into him like a tidal wave, relentless, unforgiving. Across the city, Isabella's flight continued, frantic, each step more desperate than the last. The shadows pursuing her moved with precision, cutting off avenues of escape, pushing her closer to the edge of the river. The twins squirmed, sensing her tension, tiny hands grasping at her neck and shoulders. Rain soaked through her jacket, soaked through her resolve, but she pressed on, one step, then another. Every instinct screamed to protect them, yet the world was a blur of movement, danger, and fear. Marcus's mind spun with strategies, contingency plans, and the sudden devastating clarity of his failure. Every phone call he had ignored, every command he had withheld, every second he had allowed pride to dictate inaction, it all compounded into a single, unbearable truth. He had underestimated the stakes. The photograph had not been a memory. It had been a bridge connecting the past and present, pulling him into a confrontation he could no longer avoid. He called his most trusted operative directly, voice low, urgent, trembling with a rare mixture of fear and resolve. "Find her, now. Do not fail. I don't care what it takes. Bring her and the twins to safety." The words left his mouth with a force he had rarely allowed to escape, command not filtered by pride or calculation, but by raw, unfiltered urgency. He knew he was too late, but action, even delayed, was all he had left. Isabella's path took her to the edge of the river, slick concrete beneath her shoes, the wind howling, rain blinding. She paused, sensing the inevitability of the confrontation. The shadows were closing, and there was no escape, only the desperate hope that someone, anyone, would intervene. She whispered to the twins, voices barely audible above the storm, a prayer that carried more fear than faith, and then a sharp movement behind her, a hand, a grasp, the imminent weight of danger pressing against her back. Marcus, watching the city from above, felt his heart lurch violently. He could see the alley, faint outlines illuminated by streetlights and lightning flashes. He could see Isabella struggling, slipping, nearly falling, twins pressed to her chest. Every command he had withheld, every message he had ignored, every moment of refusal was suddenly undeniable. Pride had failed him. Action, even now, could save her, but the realization came too late to undo the terror she had endured. The operative he had sent moved like a shadow through the rain, silent and precise, closing the distance between predator and prey. Marcus watched every second, stomach tight, chest aching, as the storm carried both peril and hope. Yet even as the operative approached, the truth Marcus had long avoided, the consequences of his choices, the depth of vulnerability he had rejected, was finally undeniable. The empire, the power, the wealth, they could not protect what he had ignored, the fragile human bonds that mattered most. Isabella stumbled, the twins shifting in her arms, one hand reaching out instinctively for balance. The figure behind her lunged, shadowed and desperate, but a hand grabbed her shoulder, firm, controlled, unwavering. She spun, and the storm masked the operative's movements, the details obscured by rain and darkness. Relief and fear collided in a visceral rush, yet she could not yet see who had intervened. Her muscles trembled, adrenaline coursing in sharp, relentless waves as the rain beat down and the city roared around her. Marcus clenched his fists, jaw tight, the weight of revelation pressing into him. He had been blind, deaf, willfully ignorant. The photograph, the messages, the storm, they were not incidental. They were signals of a truth he had refused to acknowledge. The twins, Lucas and Lila, were alive, vulnerable, tethered to him by the mistakes of pride and neglect. And Isabella, his Isabella, was not simply a shadow of the past. She was the anchor of consequences, the embodiment of a choice he had made and abandoned. The operative reached Isabella fully, securing her and the twins, moving with the precision of someone who understood both the threat and the stakes. The figure pursuing her paused, realizing the sudden intervention, hesitation breaking the rhythm of pursuit. Rain fell in torrents, masking the sounds of struggle, but the danger was not yet neutralized. Every second was a razor, cutting through fragile bonds and tense air. Marcus felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. He had stumbled upon the truth, the immediacy of peril, the fragility of the life he had neglected, the way his pride had endangered everything he claimed to hold sacred. And yet, even as the operative secured Isabella and the twins, Marcus understood that revelation alone was insufficient. The past, the photograph, the pride, it had all led to this nexus of fear, vulnerability, and consequence. And he was finally, brutally, aware of the true cost of his refusal. Isabella's eyes widened as the operative guided her toward safety, the twins quiet but trembling. Rain soaked through her hair and clothes, body shaking from exertion and adrenaline. Relief and terror warred inside her, the narrow escape masking the reality that the threat was not over. Marcus, watching from above, finally understood the full weight of his mistakes. Pride had dictated his inaction. Action was now only reaction, and even reaction could not undo what had already begun. In the storm, as Isabella was moved toward temporary safety, a single figure emerged from the shadows, a second unseen threat, silent, deliberate, and far closer than Marcus had anticipated. The operative's grip tightened around Isabella, but a cold certainty struck him. They were not finished. The real danger was only beginning. Marcus, staring at the unfolding scene from his penthouse, finally understood the scope of the consequences and felt for the first time the terrifying weight of power without foresight. Marcus DeLuca's hands were trembling, not from weakness, but from the weight of a truth he had refused to confront until it had almost shattered everything. The storm had not eased. Rain hammered the city in relentless sheets, wind howling through streets like a predator, and Marcus felt the pulse of chaos below him as acutely as the pounding in his chest. He had spent hours staring at photographs, ignoring messages, clinging to pride, and now the consequences had become real. Isabella Hart, the twins, his past, his mistakes, his love. They were all in motion toward danger, and he had only one choice left: intervene. He strode from the penthouse with a speed that belied his usual deliberate control, his men moving silently in tandem behind him. The city's streets were slick and flooded, lights reflecting in the pools like broken stars. He drove without thought, instinct guiding him, bypassing normal caution, ignoring traffic lights, weaving through the rain-soaked avenues as if the storm itself were urging him forward. For the first time, Marcus understood what true desperation felt like: raw, uncompromising, unshielded by power or wealth. Isabella's escape had slowed. The twins were heavy, their bodies pressed to hers, soaked through by the rain, shivering with fear and cold. The operative assigned to protect them moved with calculated urgency, scanning shadows, anticipating threats. But the second figure from the alley, the unseen danger, had been relentless, moving faster than any ordinary pursuit. A hand reached for Isabella's shoulder and she stumbled, heart hammering, the twins' tiny cries piercing through the storm. Fear had become tangible, almost a physical presence pressing down on her chest. Marcus's phone buzzed, a final desperate message from the operative, voice clipped with tension. "They're at the bridge. Immediate intervention required." Marcus barely registered the words. His mind had already calculated the trajectory, the paths, the steps. Every second of inaction had brought them closer to harm, but now the final stretch was upon them. The city blurred around him as he navigated the streets, senses sharpened, adrenaline and guilt fused into one driving force. Isabella struggled across the slick bridge, small hands pressed to her twins' backs, their bodies wriggling with fear and exhaustion. Rain whipped through her hair, stinging her face, soaking through her jacket. She dared not look behind her. Instinct screamed that danger was too close. The shadows that pursued them moved with a precision that betrayed experience, calculating every misstep, waiting for the slightest falter. And then, as if summoned by the storm itself, headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the bridge in stark, blinding streaks. Marcus skidded onto the bridge in his blacked-out sedan, tires hissing against wet concrete. He leapt from the car before it had even stopped, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. His eyes locked onto Isabella and the twins, bodies trembling against the storm, shadows advancing on them with lethal intent. His voice, low and commanding, cut through the roar of wind and rain. "Get back! Now!" The shadowed figures faltered, not expecting the presence of a man whose reputation was whispered across the city like legend. Marcus moved faster than instinct would allow, intercepting the threat before it reached Isabella. A hand connected with precision, and the first assailant stumbled, caught off guard by the sheer force of his intervention. Rain-soaked, breath coming in sharp gasps, Marcus shielded Isabella instinctively. The twins pressed against him, a tangible reminder of the stakes. Isabella's wide eyes met his. Relief, disbelief, and lingering fear collided. "Marcus," she whispered, voice trembling, rain and exhaustion merging with raw emotion. She could not speak further. The storm, the adrenaline, the terror, it all crashed over her, leaving words unnecessary. The twins squirmed in her arms, small hands gripping her shoulder, Lucas letting out a soft cry, Lila clutching her neck. Marcus adjusted his stance, pulling them close, scanning for remaining danger. The second shadow lunged, but Marcus was ready. Years of empire building, years of ruthlessness, channeled into a single fluid motion. He intercepted the figure, movement precise, unavoidable, ending the immediate threat with controlled force. The rain plastered everyone to the concrete, the storm blending the sounds of struggle with the natural chaos around them. When it was over, silence descended, punctuated only by the pounding rain and shallow, ragged breaths. Marcus turned fully to Isabella and the twins, chest heaving. Every ounce of pride he had clung to was gone, washed away by fear, guilt, and the raw awareness of what could have been lost. Isabella's face, pale and soaked, reflected equal parts exhaustion and relief. The twins stirred, tiny hands brushing Marcus's sleeve as though sensing his protective presence, their vulnerability forcing him to confront a truth he had long avoided. He could control empires, threats, and men, but he could not protect what he loved through pride alone. Isabella whispered again, voice raw. You came." Marcus said nothing, his gaze on the twins, on the way their small bodies depended entirely on her, and now on him. The storm had not ended. Rain continued to pound the bridge, yet around them a fragile bubble of calm had formed. Danger had been halted, but Marcus understood more profoundly than ever that the storm inside him, the storm of pride, of choices ignored, was only beginning to settle. He guided them to his car, movements careful, instinctive. Isabella followed, clutching the twins, her body still shaking from exertion. Marcus's operative remained near, ensuring no further threat lingered, but the focus had shifted. The immediate danger was over. The long, raw reckoning of consequences, emotions, and unspoken truths had begun. Once inside the warmth of the car, rain streaming down the windows, Marcus finally allowed a rare moment of vulnerability. He looked at Isabella, his voice low, controlled but heavy with unspoken guilt. I should have been here sooner. I should have acted sooner." Isabella's lips parted slightly, caught between relief and lingering distrust, between gratitude and the unhealed wounds of the past. The twins stirred in her arms, soft murmurs mingling with the sound of rain, grounding the moment in fragile hope. The storm outside began to relent, rain thinning into a drizzle, wind softening its howl. And as the city around them shifted back into relative calm, Marcus and Isabella found themselves tethered not by pride, not by empire, but by something deeper: survival, shared fear, and the fragile, undeniable threads of connection that had endured despite absence, distance, and refusal. Marcus's hands rested lightly on the twins' small forms, protective but tentative. He understood now that the photograph, the warnings, the storm, they had all been signals, not intrusions. The life he had ignored, the choices he had refused to acknowledge, had demanded attention, and he had answered finally, not as a boss, not as an emperor of crime, but as a man who had learned that pride could never substitute for love. Isabella finally spoke, voice steadying, soft but resolute. "We're safe, for now. But you need to remember, Marcus, pride doesn't save anyone." Her words struck deeper than any storm, cutting through his defenses, echoing truths he had long resisted. He nodded, silent, absorbing the lesson, knowing it was one that would shape him far beyond this night, far beyond the storm. The car drove through the rain-slick streets, the city gradually waking, unaware of the near catastrophe that had unfolded within its shadows. Marcus kept his eyes forward, hands firm on the wheel, but the photograph remained in his mind, a reminder of the past, of vulnerability, and of the choices that had brought them here. Isabella and the twins, their small forms nestled in safety, were living proof that even amidst chaos, love, action, and humility could forge a fragile, precious order. As they arrived at a safe house, Marcus stepped out first, rain dripping from his dark coat. Isabella followed, twins in her arms. He looked at her, then at the city beyond the walls, and whispered, almost to himself, "Nothing is ever certain. But we survived." For the first time, he allowed himself a fleeting smile, tempered by awareness of the cost, the lessons learned, and the life ahead. The photograph, the storm, the refusal, they had all led to this reckoning. And though the night had been won, Marcus knew survival was only the beginning of rebuilding not just his empire, but himself.